Hey soccer fans, welcome back to another episode of the Feed the Fire podcast. I'm your host Nick, and this is our final episode of the regular season. The Chicago Fire ended their season this weekend on October 19th after a 3-0 loss at home to Nashville. So we're going to recap that game, recap some of the Fire news from the last week or so, then look ahead and explore some MLS End of the Year awards, and then take a look at the playoff matchups now that decision day has gone final. Before we get into that, please remember you can follow along with all of my developments here on the podcast and on the channel on social media at Glasshouse Soccer, or you can email me at any time, glasshousesoccer@gmail.com. I'm hoping to put out a couple episodes a week, even throughout the playoffs and off-season, so email me anything you want to hear me discuss, my takes on any news around the world of American soccer, or even international soccer, if that's your thing. We'll talk about it all, especially in the off-season. Always a conversation to be had. So make sure you follow along, like, subscribe, share the show. Let's continue to grow the conversation around the Chicago Fire and Major League Soccer, as well as expand the channel here. And with that out of the way, let's take a look back at the Chicago Fire's decision day match against Nashville SC, as much as it pains us to look back at that 3-0 loss. Now, things didn't start off so bad. As a matter of fact, the first 15-20 minutes or so, the Fire actually looked fairly decent. Now, Nashville did have more of the possession, and I think a lot of people in the crowd were rightly upset that the Fire weren't doing more as the home team, wanting to finish on a high note and maybe just not finish the worst team in the Eastern Conference, which is what happened. But the Fire kind of grew into the game a little bit during the first half. In the last 20-25 minutes or so, they actually had the majority of the possession. And there were some moments from my vantage point up in section 205. Shout out to Ryan. Great to see you up there in 205 with your daughter. Hope you guys had a lot of fun. Glad you made the trip out. I'm glad you stopped me to say hello, shake my hand, and get to meet face to face instead of over email. So Ryan, thank you for being at the game, saying hi, and being up in section 205 with me. Because in 205, you could see almost like a flock of birds kind of moving together as they're migrating south for the winter, which is, I'm sure a few players are thinking about here in this MLS offseason now, but they actually looked like they were flowing together, that they had some sort of formation, that they were staying in decent shape. Now, it didn't bear out over the course of 90 minutes. Obviously, they were trying to push a little later in the game to get a goal back, and if you go and you look at the passing charts from some of the advanced statistic modeling, you'll see once again that the midfielders in the center of the field were very bunched up. However, it started off pretty well, and it actually was a better looking start than we've seen in the past few games for the Fire. However, the 0-0 scoreline at halftime, you think they'd come out fired up, pardon the pun as always, but they did not. They came out just the way they ended the first half, kind of very even keel, and it was Nashville who took advantage. Alex Mule scores in the 54th minute, then Sam Surridge scores in the 87th minute. Jacob Schaffelberg tops it off in 90+1. And the Mule goal, again, I'm butchering his name, Mule, excuse me. His goal, you know, it was what it was. It wasn't the best Fire defending, but Nashville kind of earned that one. It was the other two that really had me upset about the team's defense. Surridge just dribbled through 3 defenders, blew right by Acosta, dribbled past 2 more guys, maybe a third, and then maybe catches Brady cheating just a little bit to his far post and is able to slot it home near post. And Schaffelberg does the same thing. You think that he just is going to blast it far post across the front of the net, and maybe Brady again was cheating just a little bit, but you know, when you're down 1 or 2 goals, you kind of have to do that to give your team a chance. But it's Schaffelberg who takes the near post opening then and makes it 3-0. So maybe not the best match for Brady, but what are you going to say about a guy who has had to deal with so many shots, has had to deal with so much adversity from the other opponent, just constantly peppering his net, a defense that can't stay healthy throughout the year, that can't track, can't mark. It's been really tough for Chris Brady. So in the final game of the season, I'll let him off the hook. And I'll let you all off the hook without any further analysis. Let's just jump right into the stats and see if it matches up with your eye test at all. The Fire ended up with 49% possession. They had 12 shots, 6 on goal. So an okay offensive output if you think about it. The Fire actually had a lot of good opportunities. Kutsias, Kuipers had a couple of shots from inside the 18, but they just couldn't find the power to get it past Joe Willis in net for Nashville. Granted, he had a good game himself, but if they could have just put a little bit more pace on one or two of those shots, maybe those end up getting past Willis before he can react, since they were from such close range. Alas, not the story here. The Fire defense blocked 3 shots. They completed 83.5% of their 492 passes. Only took 4 corners. A lot of the fans were upset. Didn't get the free Portillo's hot dog for 5 corner kicks in this match. Would have been a nice way to end the season, but again, it is what it is. The Fire had 11 total crosses, no offside calls. They won 7 duels to Nashville's 9 in the air, however. And when you have a defender of Walker Zimmerman's quality and height and power, you probably aren't going to win a lot of those duels in their defensive third. The Fire did end up with 1.4 expected goal, and I think that just comes from the fact that a few of their shots were at close range. Even though they weren't hit with much power or pace or precision, that's not taken into account in the XG model. It's just kind of where the ball is shot from. At least that has the most weight, the way I understand the modeling. So 1.4 XG to Nashville's 1.8, but again, the scoreline is all that matters. Brady's credited with 3 saves, the defense credited with 6 clearances. The Fire committed 13 fouls to Nashville's 7, but only picked up 1 yellow card to Nashville's 3. And you thought maybe that would help out the Fire a little bit, but alas, that did not. So that is the statistical breakdown of the game. If you want to take a look at the starting lineup, they played, it was listed as a 4-5-1 here on MLSsoccer.com, but it looked to be more of a 3 in the back kind of a situation. You had Pineda, Salquist, and Suke as kind of your center-ish backs. You had Jonathan Dean as an outside back. Midfielders of Chris Mueller, Kellen Acosta, Brian Gutierrez, Fede Navarro, who got his yellow card, of course, Marin Haile Selassie, and Hugo Kuipers. We saw Lassiter and Chihos, Gaston Jimenez, Justin Reynolds, and Yorgos Koutsias all come in as subs. A lot of criticism for Gaston Jimenez over the last few weeks about why he can't play at a consistently decent level. People tend to think, well, he's playing for his contract, and when that didn't happen, here we are. He's just that kind of overpaid, underqualified kind of guy who failed upward into some DP contracts. So that is where the Fire ended up at the end of this season. A 3-0 loss at home to Nashville, finishing bottom in the East, 30 points on 34 games. And if you're doing the quick calculations, that's 0.88 points per game, one of their fewest points per game in the last several years. And the only team with less points than them, San Jose, getting the wooden spoon. So if it weren't for the San Jose Quakes being so miserable, Chicago Fire would be your worst team in the league. If you want to look at the rest of the Eastern Conference standings, the bottom third of the teams who did not make the playoffs, you had DC finishing in the 10th spot, 40 points. Toronto and Philly in the 11th and 12th spot on 37 points. Nashville, 13th on 36 points. New England, 14th place in the East on 31 points. And then the Chicago Fire, 30 points, bottom of the East. So the Fire would have had to make up 10 points throughout the course of this season in order to be in the playoff picture, in order to be right around that line for one of the play-in games. They would have had to make up 17 points throughout the course of the season to bump off New York or to be in an equal position to the New York Red Bulls, who are in the 7th spot, the final playoff lock. So we know that the Fire played poorly throughout the season. We knew there were a lot of games where they had to come back and salvage a draw, or there were a lot of games where they gave up leads late to either draw or end up losing the game. But over the course of the season, I haven't gone back and looked at the games, but for them to make up 10 points over the course of these games, that's an extra point every 3 games. Do you think that the Fire could have done that and put themselves into playoff contention, say, with some better coaching and tactics, say, with a little bit of a better performance by Gaston Jimenez and Fede Navarro? Maybe Chris Mueller finishes a couple shots throughout the season. Maybe Koutsias and Kuipers convert on a couple. If Lassiter's not out on international duty, can he help them win a couple games late in the season to at least stay in the hunt a little bit? if we had a healthy defensive backline and could play a 4-man backline instead of a 3 center back and a couple wing back, and putting Jonathan Dean on either side of the field depending on who's hurt, having to rely on Arnaud Souquet, could we have developed Justin Reynolds a little bit quicker and maybe had him fill in for Souquet? Could Aragoni have been better in certain situations than Souquet or Dean? All these questions that went on throughout the course of the season, would it have made up the 10-point difference the Fire would have needed to be right around that 9-10 spot? Would it have made up that 17-point difference for them to lock in a playoff spot? I don't know. I'm leaning towards no. I'm leaning towards that this was just an underperforming year. Poor coaching, poor player development, poor tactics, no motivation from the players. And then on top of it, you have Miami with a historic year, and I really do mean that because they set the single-season points record with their win over New England, 74 points on the season, most in MLS history. You've got Columbus, who probably could have done something similar to Miami from a point standpoint if they weren't playing in multiple other tournaments throughout the season. Cincinnati on 59 points, Orlando on 52, getting back into the top 4 after a very, very slow start to this year. So would anything the Fire have done affected those top 4 teams? Probably not. And who would have thought that New England would have fallen so far and stayed down at the bottom of the table, despite their kind of success against the Fire early on in the season? So there's a lot of things that we could look back on in the season. For me, it comes down to players not being motivated. It comes down to coaching staff not adjusting tactically, not developing players, not bringing up second-team players to kind of push some of these first players for minutes or to change the pace in training. And then, of course, a lot of the training aspects of what to do on set pieces, offensively and defensively, fell short, as well as just basic tactical formations and how do you attack certain defenses? What do you do when you have a dual striker versus a solo striker or a high striker and a lower striker, things of that nature? What do you do when you build your whole team to play up the wings and your wingers aren't getting crosses in? Like, these are the things that the Fire couldn't do from a coaching and tactical standpoint. But then, of course, you had Fede Navarro, Gaston Jimenez, completely underperforming in the midfield. You had Mauricio Pineda, who was out with injury. You had Chihos and Olmsberg and Turan all out with injury at times, and even when they weren't playing to the best that we've seen them play. So there's a lot that went into this pitiful season. A lot of it was in the control of the Chicago Fire, some of it not so much. But we hope that the next iteration of this team is going to be a completely different one under the new director of football, Gregg Berhalter, and the new head coach, Gregg Berhalter. And we heard the announcements in his press conference last Wednesday when he was introduced, where Joe Mansueto and Gregg Berhalter spoke to the press and did an online broadcast of that introduction. So I wanted to recap some of the things that were said and done during that press conference. I took a lot of notes. I was typing furiously. Thank you to the CHGO podcast Twitter feed, who is really also doing a good job of keeping up with a lot of that. You can go kind of get an online recap of that when you follow along on their Twitter account. But here's kind of the progression of that introductory press conference and looking ahead to next season. And yeah, I'm going to get to the stadium news as well. Now, Gregg Berhalter was introduced as the head coach, 10th head coach in Chicago Fire history. You saw Gabe Ramirez kind of warming up the crowd a little bit. Mansueto opened up the presser with his own statements, and I think he used the word excited like a dozen times in his few-minute opening remark. He discussed the process of how they went about and found and hired Gregg Berhalter. It started with Jörg Heitz making his resignation known to Mansueto. They put together a list of 80 candidates. Now, I've got no reason to doubt that number. 80 is a solid list. It wasn't like he had a guy lined up waiting in the wings, or this wasn't like, well, I can just call Klopas and have him coach if no one else steps up. They had 80 guys who quickly whittled down to 3. And of that 80, though, Mansueto said, we had our internal people, or the people that we, the internal Fire employees, had wanted to interview for the position. And there were a number of people who had reached out to the Chicago Fire. I haven't seen who those people were, but I would love to know some of the agents and coaches who reached out to the Fire organization to say, hey, I'd love to interview for this job. whether they think it can't get worse for them or whether they think I can really turn this around and this is a great opportunity. I like to believe it's the latter. I really think it's the latter because Berhalter even said that himself. You've got a squad who has a young, talented core, who's got an owner who's invested emotionally and financially and willing to invest more. New facilities, great homegrown system, designated player slots available, guys that they can move off of their roster and rebuild the roster the way they want it to. So I like to think that a lot of these candidates saw the positives that are coming down the pipeline for the Fire, but it ended up getting whittled down to 3 candidates, 1 international candidate and 2 domestic American candidates. Now, Mansueto said he wanted to give whoever the new coach was time to work on the roster, so they wanted to move quickly and have this ready to go right at the end of the season. He had a 3-hour interview with Gregg Berhalter, which, to me, to interview for the director of sporting as well as the head coach doesn't seem like much, but you already know Gregg's resume with the USMNT, with the Columbus Crew, with Hammarby, and I think a lot of the X's and O's talk you really didn't need to get into, and what he wanted to see from his team. What they really did get into was Berhalter's vision for the club as an organization, like high-level stuff, and how he's going to make that happen on the sporting side of things. After the 3-hour interview, Berhalter ended up with a 2-hour meeting with Mansueto. And after they signed the contract and got Gregg the position, he was at Mansueto's house the next day discussing the roster. I think that's great. That's definitely like a workaholic type of thing, but how exciting, right? How great do we as fans feel knowing that the new director of sporting and head coach was so excited to get to work that he's at the owner's house the day after he signs his contract talking roster. That's awesome, I think. A little backstory here of Berhalter and Mansueto's relationship. When Joe Mansueto bought into the Chicago Fire, Gregg Berhalter actually reached out to him, and they've kept in touch ever since. Also, Mansueto said that he liked Berhalter's large network around the world as a player, coach, and recruiter, and he liked how he leads. Taking the USMNT to train with the Navy SEALs in San Diego was one of the examples that he gave. These kind of out-of-the-box thinking, team-building kind of exercises. Also, he knew Berhalter has ties to Chicago and would represent the city well, something that we have always heard with Joe Mansueto, city pride, Chicago focused. He wanted someone who wants the job as much as we wanted them, Mansueto said, and it was clear Berhalter wanted the job as much as Mansueto wanted to hire him. This was not just for the money or to come take a vacation in the U.S., he said. This is someone who has a real heart for it. And I'm paraphrasing Mansueto's words there. But yeah, so that does suggest to me that there were probably some international coaches or maybe some European international, maybe some Latin, South American coaches who are like, yeah, I'll come coach the Fire for a couple years. I can do that and hang out in the U.S. a little bit, live it up in Chicago, travel around. It shows me 2 things. Number one, that there's still that mentality of the MLS being a retirement league from these coaching perspective. Maybe we're getting rid of that stigma from a playing perspective, from a roster perspective. But there are still some coaches who think they can come in and get a cushy gig here in MLS because there's no relegation, right? But it also tells me Mansueto is kind of leading the pack of the ownership, or maybe not leading, but part of the ownership pack who's saying, we don't want those kind of coaches here. We don't care what their European pedigree is if they think they're just here to collect a paycheck and just kind of put out a team and putz around for a couple seasons. So that is another positive that I'm kind of reading between the lines here from a league perspective. And at the end of his remarks, Mansueto thanked Georg Heitz, leaving the organization stronger than he did 5 years ago, obviously mentioning the academy, building up the training center, all the other things that we've talked about on this show on kind of the business organizational side of things. Mansueto did reflect on the season. He said he was disappointed in the outcome and that they did not meet the expectations, which was at a minimum to make the playoffs. Quote, things did not gel for us on the pitch, end quote. That is very much an understatement there, Joe. Things obviously did not gel on the pitch, but he is excited for next season, as I think all the fans should be. So that's the summary for Mansueto's opening remarks, and I read into those a little bit more, so hopefully my recap here of Gregg Berhalter's remarks won't be as lengthy as that. But Gregg said there were two reasons why he took the Chicago Fire position: director of sport as well as, or director of football as well as head coach. Number one, the word he used was alignment. Where the club wants to go is where he wants to build his club. And you've heard the quotes. I want to make this one of the best clubs in North America, consistently competing for trophies, all those sort of things. So Mansueto's vision for where he wants someone to take the club is aligned with Berhalter's vision of where he wants to take a club. Also, he used the word potential a lot. And I will say, Berhalter would fit in very well in the corporate world as a manager, because he used all the buzzwords throughout the course of this. And there was a prior podcast episode where I recapped the webinar I sat in with BJ Callahan, Berhalter's former assistant coach and now the Nashville coach, talked about how they spoke and coached up players on the usmnt. And there was a lot of that positive corporate speak that's there. You know, they didn't call their subs or bench players, they called them solutions or alternatives or options. I think it was solutions was the right one. But that gives you kind of the sense of where they were coming from. Whether you like it or not, that's how it's going to be conveyed. And that is kind of how they're going to build in a very kind of corporate, positive attitude sense. Again, Berhalter said alignment and potential. We talked about alignment. The potential was in the market. Chicago, obviously, one of the biggest markets in the United States. Potential in the club, the players, and potential in the team as an organization. New training facility. He compared it to some of the top European facilities and one of the best in the MLS. So that probably is a little bit of puffery, but still, the fact that we have this brand new facility, if it is one of the top in MLS, or the top in MLS as it's the newest, that could be the deciding factor to sign an international player who maybe is getting a few more dollars to go to, say, a Dallas or a Seattle, or if it comes down to, are you going to play in LA, Miami, New York, or Chicago? Well, we got this brand new training facility here in New York. You know, they're still playing in baseball stadiums. So that could be something that helps sway some of these future signings here. He also, like Mansueto, called the Chicago Fire a sleeping giant in MLS. Let's see. He wants to give the fans a product they can be proud of. It will take some time, but we'll get there. And then it went into, he also talked about how Chicago is about, the city of Chicago is about community and sports. Players want to come here. It's a world-class city and a soccer-rich city. That I'm going to kind of hedge on a little bit there, Greg. Players might want to come here if you overpay them a little bit, and we've seen that with some of our more recent DP signings. And also, you can't say players want to come here when players also want to go to LA, New York, Miami, and other cities as well, right? So that you're going to have to kind of prove it to us. That's where you got to work on it. Yes, Chicago is about community and about sports. It is a world-class city, a soccer-rich city. You're going to have to convince some of the players to come here, though, with a little bit more than that. Then we got into the Q&A. Great questions from Joe Chats on Tap Sportsnet, Tim Hotza, Men in Red 97, Paul Tenorio from The Athletic, Alex Campbell, CHGO, Jeff Carlisle, ESPN, Alex Calabrese, Men in Red 97, Charles Boehm, I can't pronounce last names today. I don't know what it is. From MLSsoccer.com. Jim Alexander of Real Talker. There were a few different Spanish news outlets. La Ley 1079, as well as another Spanish news agency, and I'm sorry I couldn't catch it. Brian Sandalo from the Tribune. Omar Ramos from Univision Radio, as well as the Chicago Fire Spanish broadcast. Joe Lowry of Backheel. Danny Ecker of Crane's Chicago Business. Of course, he was asking a little bit about the stadium, and Tom Hindle of Goal.com. And there's a lot of conversation. Go back and watch the press conference online. But the big things that I want to kind of point out here, obviously, let's start with the stadium talk. We got it brought up in this conversation by Danny Ecker from Crane's Chicago Business. And he asked Berhalter how big a deal were the facilities when making the decision. Obviously, the new training center, possible future stadium, and home games. Joe Mansueto started to answer this question, and he said, Soldier Field is historic, but it has limitations. Sharing with the Bears, concerts, certain sponsors are blocked out to the Chicago Fire because of conflicts with the Bears and the NFL, things of that nature. So as much as they like it, as much as they like it. There are limitations to it, and there are shortcomings, and he admits it. And I think that's fair, right? We can all admit that. But he went on to say they are actively looking for a soccer-specific stadium site and have actually been on site tours. This, to me, is the last piece of the puzzle of the club, and that's exactly what Joe Mansueto said. He goes, it is the last piece of the puzzle. And we've heard commentary from other people who have been covering Joe Mansueto and the Fire for the last several years that Mansueto wouldn't make a comment if he's not already 3 steps past it, right? So he wouldn't say we're visiting sites if they already, or if they haven't already been on several visits and been engaged in dialogue. To quote Joe Mansueto, if we can find the right parcel in Chicago, I think we will move forward on it. Now later it came out that the 3 sites they looked at was a site in Bronzeville where there's currently a hospital building. There's the 78. That was originally set to be the University of Illinois Technology Center. University of Illinois has since nixed that deal, and the developer has gone out to reach out both to the Chicago White Sox and the Chicago Fire about potentially building some either dual-use stadium, which I would be opposed to. Baseball and soccer can't cohabitate in the same stadium, or building 2 separate stadiums on the grounds and just kind of developing the whole area as like a central Chicago sports complex. I think that would be a cool idea. The 3rd location, Lincoln Yards, there was going to be an Amazon office space warehouse there, and they were going to develop. There was even talk about putting in a USL club in that area, building a soccer stadium for them. Those plans have all fallen through. Selfishly, I think Lincoln Yards would be the best just because it's closer to the northwest suburbs where I live, but I also think that would give you the most land and the most space to develop on. So I would say Lincoln Yards and the 78 are your front runners, probably because there's more easier land to develop as well as more space. The Bronzeville one, I think that would be harder to develop to get rid of the current buildings, but also the infrastructure from a traffic standpoint and a utility standpoint and all those sort of things. I think it would be the most difficult site to build on of those 3. Let's see, what other notes about the stadium? Mansueto, as we've talked about on the show, was in it for the long play. As we've said here, you got to get your feet under you. You've got to build up your business and then build out the sporting side, and the stadium is the last piece. Why would he jump in and make a splash with this big brand new stadium that you're going to fill for maybe half a season and then it's going to be empty? Why not make sure you can get 20,000 fans week in and week out? And by the way, Chicago Fire's announced attendance on this season was just about 22,000 on average. Obviously, there's the Messi effect that's bringing a lot of people in for that. For the Miami game, I think there were over 40,000 there. So that is going to skew some of the numbers a little bit, but still, if you're hovering around that 18,000 fan mark average attendance and you're the worst team in the Eastern Conference, that's encouraging if you want to build a stadium. Now, it was later reported that the Fire have triggered their next 3-year lease option at Soldier Field, so for the next 3 years they will be there, and that's, roughly about the time it takes to build a stadium the right way, right? Hopefully then, by the start of the 2028 season, we got a brand new soccer-specific stadium in Chicago we're talking about. Gregg Berhalter also chimed in and said, if we want to be a certain kind of club, as he said, one of the best in North America, we have to back it up, including with facilities. Tom Hindle's question on Goal.com, great way to end the press conference. What would be considered a success in 2025? And Gregg Berhalter said there's 2 things. Number 1, we need to have a clear identity on the field. We have to play the same style, game over game. We've been asking for that for years, Fire fans. Pick your last 3 or 4 coaches. They have just constantly been mixing things up, formations, players, styles, whatever. And I'm not talking about in-game adjustments. I'm just talking about how to start a game. No consistency, no set style of play. So that would be a huge improvement. That's one of those short-term goals. You can get that done by the beginning of the 2025 season, without a doubt. Secondly, he says making the playoffs is the minimum requirement in MLS. So he is already going, I think, one step above what a lot of expectations were or are. We just have to make the playoffs. No. Making the playoffs is now the floor. That is how everyone on the sporting side is going to be measured. At least this is me reading into it. When you say making the playoffs is the minimum requirement, if you don't make the playoffs, then there are going to be a lot more hard questions to answer, and he's going to have to look inward because now he has no one but himself to blame. He's the director of football. He is the end-all, be-all when it comes to the on-the-field product. Can't say I'm too thrilled about Klopas still having his hands in some of the coaching and player development and scouting and the second team academy stuff, but it all is going to end with Gregg Berhalter, and I think Klopas is, I don't want to say deferential enough, but I think he's respectful enough, and I think he is professional enough where if Berhalter, who is his boss now, says, hey, stop doing it this way, I want you to do it that way, I think he'll do it, and hopefully it aligns with the vision from top to bottom. As we've talked about on this show, Major League Baseball clubs preach the same kind of playing style from their Major League team all the way down to their single A clubs. And that's what I'm hoping Berhalter will bring to the Chicago Fire. Speaking of the tactical identity, Joe Lowry of Backheeled asked, what's the vision for Fire tactically? And Joe did point out how Gregg's tactics have changed from when he coached the Crew to the USMNT and then within the USMNT as the player pool had changed. Now, Berhalter says Chicago wants to control the ball, not be afraid of other teams, and hurt other teams with the ball, and keep a defensive shape and have them be difficult to penetrate. So those are kind of what he wants to see. And Berhalter said this is going to be kind of somewhere between his Crew teams and the USMNT team. I think he's just going to be able to execute it better because of the players that he's going to be able to sign. Berhalter did have the chance to talk to the players. Per a question from Omar Ramos, Klopas invited him in once it was announced. He wants to raise the standards, hold players accountable, and work together. One of the Spanish news outlets also asked, who is he going to bring in? And he said they are focusing to improve the quality of the roster. And if it's a big name, that's great. If it's not a big name, we're still trying to improve the roster. Now, from what I heard from one of the Chicago Fire youth coaches is that they have someone in mind that they're targeting who's an even bigger signing than Xherdan Shaqiri. Would be a bigger signing than Xherdan Shaqiri was when he started with the club, which is amazing. It kind of gets me thinking which USMNT player Gregg has reached out to. But also the Spanish news agency asked about Carlos Terán. Berhalter did say he's a great defender. He's got tons of potential, could be a top center back in the league. So I think that means Terán is going to stick around for at least another half season. I would like to see him stick around for a full season, stay healthy, prove himself. Don't just take that first offer that comes in from another club if he has a good start to the season. Let him play the full season, get the Fire back to the playoffs, then get a much bigger paycheck. Oh yeah, by the way, develop your skills as well. So that is some of the big stuff that came out, the things that I wanted to focus on. But again, go back. There's a lot more in the video about how the league's changed, how he's going to handle the dual role, how how he processed leaving the USMNT, taking the time off, and now getting back into MLS with Chicago in the dual role. So there's just a lot that was in that interview. And after all that, I've got to take a water break myself, and I think we all should take a water break and recognize our sponsor, Skira Icelandic Spring Water. Icelandic for clear, Skira water comes from a spring in a government-protected nature preserve in Iceland with naturally low mineral content. This isn't your average water. Clearly, pun intended, it's one of the best. And Skira Icelandic water is available at your local 7-Eleven. All right, Fire fans, thanks for sticking with us through the water break, through the halftime break, onto the second half of the show. And I'll be honest with y'all here. There's so much to talk about, and there's been so much going on that I didn't even write out my detailed notes. We're just getting headlines, and we're freewheeling it from here on out. Let's start first with one other little bit of Chicago Fire news. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see I'm wearing my Tuck in Your Friggin' Shirt t-shirt, a la Anthony and Yorgos Koutsias. I got it at the Chicago Fire clearance table at the game. The last 2 or 3 games of the season, they always have stuff 20, 25%, and then this weekend it was 50% off. If you missed it, I was hearing from someone in the organization that they're actually going to have a massive blowout sale. You can't call it a fire sale, make the jokes. They're going to have a massive sale this year at SeatGeek down in Bridgeview, where they're just going to put all this stuff out on clearance. So be on the lookout for that. I think it's going to be on November 23rd. So lock into the show here. I'll give you updates as I hear them. Lock into the Chicago Fire social media content, and be on the lookout. November 23rd. Save up your money. Get your Christmas shopping done there. Something to look out for. And by the way, I am pretty sure this was the last tuck in your friggin' shirt that was there, because I saw a lady run over, grab one, and then there was the one left, and I went, it's calling to me. It's like my siren call, my red tuck in your friggin' shirt t-shirt with Koutsias' name and number 19 on the back. I had to get it. I had to do it. There were actually some other really cool things I had to pull myself back from. There was a really neat jersey. I couldn't tell if I loved it or if I hated it. It was all blue with horizontal white stripes, and then there was a larger white stripe across the chest that had the 4 red stars of the Chicago flag on it. I'm like, it's kind of cool. But is it kind of hokey, or is it really neat? I don't know. I don't know how I would look wearing that. But a lot of different shirts, sweatshirts, kids stuff, things of that nature. So be on the lookout for some cheap swag and apparel in November. I wanted to end this show talking about, not end the show, we're not nearly done yet, folks, but getting towards the end of the show, looking at some of the MLS awards. MVP, newcomer, comeback player, stuff like that. But first of all, the Golden Boot is wrapped up. That is done and dusted. The 2024 Golden Boot winner of Major League Soccer, Christian Benteke, with 23 goals. He's in his second full season with DC United. He also had 7 assists, and let's see, this is his third ever goal, or the third ever Golden Boot for DC United. De Rosario in 2011 and Luciano Emilio in 2017 also won it for the Black and Red. Let's see what other stuff we're hearing about this announcement. What's interesting is that these 23 goals for the Golden Boot was the most since Vela's 34 goal campaign back in 2019. Hani Mukhtar did it in 2020 on 23 goals, and then you saw Joseph Martinez in 2018, Nemanja Nikolic and Bradley Wright Phillips in 2017 and 2016 had 24 goals. So this is one of the higher goal, maybe mid to high Golden Boot winning seasons early on in MLS, or I should say when they started counting it as goals and assists. Going back to 2005, we saw, some 17, 18 goal seasons. De Rosario won it in 2011 with 16 goals. Previously, though, from 1996 to 2004, they awarded the Golden Boot based on points. So if I recall correctly, 2 points for a goal, 1 point for an assist. And so you had players winning it with anywhere between 30 and 58 points combined goals and assists, right? So something to keep in mind. I like the current format better. I just think when you had only maybe like a 20-game season or something like that early on in the career of the MLS, maybe that was the better way to do it by points, but I'm glad they made the switch. But again, Christian Benteke, your 2024 MLS Golden Boot winner. Now, looking at the MLS nominees for the year-end awards, I will remind everyone that the year-end awards were voted on by MLS players, by MLS club technical staff, and select media members representing local and national outlets who consistently covered the 2024 MLS regular season. A few of the guys, if you follow them on Twitter, have put their votes and ballots out there for you to look at. So let's go through and kind of see who are some of the front runners here. I couldn't find a narrowed down list. I don't think they narrowed it down to like a final 4 or final 3. I think they just had long list this year. The article I'm looking at on MLSsoccer.com says the voting opens October 7th and ends on the 21st. Today, time of recording, Monday, October 21st. So they just had their large list. There wasn't like a preliminary list and then halfway through the season they cut it down, nothing like that. Here's your list of nominees for MLS MVP. Now, to be eligible, players must have played at least 1,000 minutes during the 2024 regular season. So yes, that does mean Messi is qualified, whether or not you think someone who's played half the games for his club should win MVP, whether you think that someone whose team is about as good with them as without them should win it. Does that eliminate Christian Benteke? Because even though he won the Golden Boot, he might be the most valuable player to DC. They still didn't make the playoffs. There's all these different ways, and it's never been defined. So the votes can go either way. And one of the things that I had been talking about with some people in my MLS fan media, independent media group, was, do you think that Messi is going to get it, obviously from the popular vote? He's got the most points per 90, most goals per 90, assists per 90. He's got all the stats, despite only playing half the games, or because he only played half the games. Maybe he would have had to pace himself more. And we saw in the last match against New England, came off the bench. But do you think that, a sizable number of the voters, the players and technical staff especially, will vote for him, and then the media vote will look at it, I don't know, with a more scrutinizing eye, and divide their votes among players like a Benteke, like a Lucho Acosta, like an Evander, and you see their votes split across players who have had more playing time, more impact on their team than, say, Messi in his 17, 18 games. I forget how many it was. And that's why it'll end up with Messi. So that's one consideration. I think they'll publish the voting afterwards. We'll have to keep an eye out for it. But here is the full list of MLS MVP candidates. Lucho Acosta, Christian Chicho Arango, Artur, Benteke, Federico Bernardeschi, Denny Bouanga, Roman Berkey, Christian Espinoza, Evander, Matt Freese, Ryan Gall, Daniel Gazdag, Carlos Hill, Cucho Hernandez, probably the front runner behind Messi if you ask me, Christian Kalina, phenomenal season, goalies don't win MVPs anymore, Saba Lobjanize, Hernan Lopez, Joseph Martinez, Leo Messi, Jordi Mihailovic, Lewis Morgan, Jordan Morris, Rafa Navarro, Martin Ojeda, Orlando City, Luca Orellano, Jonathan Osorio, Samuel Piet, Ricky Puig, Jonathan Rodriguez, Santi Rodriguez, Albert Rusnak, Luis Suarez, Facundo Torres, and Brian White. Now, a few of these guys I think are just kind of honorable mentions there, like a Jordan Morris, like a Jordi Mihailovic, like a Saba Lobjanize. I think those guys are phenomenal players and have had great seasons, but I think they're more in the honorable mention category as just having really, really good seasons. I really think your front runners for the MLS MVP award are, running down the list here, Denny Bouanga, and though he didn't have the high goal total, he still scored a lot, assisted a lot, and really stood out with his one-on-one play offensively. So I think that is going to be a boost for people who like the advanced metrics when it comes to their voting. So my top guys for this award, Denny Bouanga, Cucho Hernandez, Leo Messi, Luis Suarez, can't deny his goal-scoring ability. Ricky Puig, just because of how well LA Galaxy has played, and he's the number one cog in that wheel. They've got some other great pieces, Peck and Paintsill and others who may detract from him, but he's the one that makes it all work, I think. So those, to me, are your top guys in this conversation. Sadly, no Chicago Fire players there. If it were up to me, I would vote for Cucho Hernandez. I mean, the guy scores at will. Every team knows you got to stop Cucho to stop the crew, and yet they can't. Looking at the next award, the Siggy Schmidt MLS Coach of the Year nominee, and going back to the MVP, we all know it was renamed to the Landon Donovan MLS MVP award. Donovan, the only player to win it twice. Donovan's not the only player to win it twice. Precky's the only player to win it twice. Donovan, probably the most well-known name to win it, so it is named after him. All right, Siggy Schmidt, MLS Coach of the Year nominees. This award is given to the top MLS head coach during the 2024 regular season. Nominees must be active MLS head coaches or interim head coaches who have coached at least 5 games during the 2024 regular season. So it's like over half the league's coaches get nominated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18. Yeah, like at least two-thirds of the league's coaches are nominated here. Obviously, Frank Lopez is not nominated for the Chicago Fire, but here it is. Chris Armas, Rapids. Steve Cherundolo, LAFC. Laurent Courtois, CF Montreal. Jim Curtin, Philly Union. Nick Cushing, NYC. John Hackworth, St. Louis. John Herdman, TFC. Troy Lesane, DC. Gerardo Martino, Tata Martino, Inter Miami. Pablo Mastroeni, RSL. Wilfred Nance, Columbus Crew. He's the front runner, obviously, with everything that Columbus has been winning and how they've been winning, how they've been playing. Phil Neville, Portland. Pat Noonan, FC Cincinnati. Ben Olsen, Houston. I think Olsen's got a dark horse chance here because of how quickly he turned around Houston. Oscar Pareja, Orlando. Eric Ramsey, Minnesota. Ian Russell, San Jose. I don't know how the worst team in the league's coach gets nominated for Coach of the Year. That's odd to me. Vanni Sartini, Vancouver. Brian Schmetzer, Seattle. Sandro Schwartz, Red Bulls. Dean Smith, Charlotte. Dean Smith might have a shout. Greg Vanny, Galaxy, might have a shout. Galaxy obviously performing to their potential, which makes their coach look good. But Charlotte playing way above their potential, which of course makes their coach really look good. But I still think it's Wilfred Nance's to lose at this point. Next award goes to MLS Newcomer of the Year, and a newcomer is defined as a player with previous professional experience who made his MLS debut in 2024. Eligible players must have played at least 500 minutes during the 2024 regular season, and there's a long list of newcomer nominees. Abada from Charlotte, Biro from Austin, Buca from Cincinnati, Campos, LAFC, Crooks, Salt Lake, Kuipers, here's our Chicago nominee, Hugo Kuipers, Newcomer of the Year, Chicago Fire, Pedro de la Vega, Seattle, Forsberg, Red Bulls. He might have won it had all the off-field news not broken. But yeah, I don't think he's going to get it just because of that. Gregerson of Atlanta, Hartel from St. Louis, Catranis, Real Salt Lake. Oh, my little Greek heart just skipped a beat right there. Hugo Lloris, LAFC, Kevin Long, TFC, Matty Longstaff, TFC, Hernan Lopez, San Jose. Again, I don't know how you can win Newcomer of the Year when your team is so bad. But actually, maybe Kuipers is the exception to that rule. We'll see. Peter Musa, Dallas, Ojeda, New York City, Orejano from Cincinnati, Paintsill, and Peck from the Galaxy. Those guys, one of them's either going to win it or they're going to split the votes, and it's going to go to, let's say, Luis Suarez from Inter Miami. Also on the list, Bartosz Slisz, Atlanta United, Matias Rojas, Inter Miami, Jonathan Rodriguez, Portland Timbers, Ezequiel Ponce, Houston Dynamo, Matty Peltola, DC United, Amal Pellegrino, San Jose, and Cedric Tukert, St. Louis, Bjorning Utvik from Vancouver, Hannes Wolf, New York City, and Kelvin Yaboa, Minnesota. So those are some names there. This is a list that I like to use as my who to watch out for in 2025 list. Guys like Emil Forsberg, guys like Hugo Lloris, guys like Luis Suarez, obviously they're on this list because they've had a great career and they have maintained a high level. But you look at guys like Kelvin Yaboa, Bartosz Slisz, like Pedro de la Vega, Hugo Kuipers, maybe is a little bit bordering the edge of that. These guys have proven themselves this season, and now it's up to them to take the next step, or at least not take a step back. All right, we've also got Young Player of the Year nominee, as well as Defender of the Year nominee, and Goalkeeper of the Year nominee, Comeback Player of the Year nominee, Drive Progress Impact Award nominee, who gets awarded to the MLS player with outstanding dedication to charity and serving the community. And then we've got Referee of the Year and Assistant Referee of the Year. That's too many names for me to go through, so let me just pick a few things out here. Referee of the Year, it's Drew Fisher, Guido Gonzalez, or Lucas Chapala. The only name I've heard is Drew Fisher. Maybe that's good or maybe that's bad. Assistant Referee of the Year, Kyle Atkins, Logan Brown, Jeremy Hansen. Not familiar with any of their work, which is probably a good thing for them being referees, but those are your Assistant Referee nominees. I want to highlight the Audi Goals Drive Progress Impact Award for charitable efforts and community service. I think every team has a player nominated for this one, and from the Chicago Fire, it is Kellen Acosta. So he has done a lot of charitable work over the year. Comeback Player of the Year. I'd like to see Lewis Morgan take this one, or Robin Ludd. Like Ludd might get it as the all-star that's on this list. Maybe Eddie Segura has a shout, but those would be my three guys. Robin Ludd, Lewis Morgan or Eddie Segura. Dark horse, Maxi Morales, Richie Larea, Leon Flock, since those guys are kind of known household MLS names there. Goalkeeper of the year, probably going to end up being Christian Kalina just because of his statistical performances and the clean sheets and how well Charlotte has played above their roster talent, so to say. But we need to note Chris Brady does get the nominee here for Goalkeeper of the Year, even though, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, yeah, almost all the goalkeepers got nominated. Almost all the starting goalkeepers got nominated. All right. Defender of the Year, again, there were many nominees, almost 30 nominees for this. None from the Chicago Fire. Shouldn't be shocked by that at all. Some names to highlight: Jordi Alba, Thomas Aviles from Miami, Rudy Camacho of the Crew, Justin Glad gets a nomination from Salt Lake, Yamar from Seattle, a name that usually pops up on this list. Let's see, who are some guys who might actually be favorites to win this year? If we're looking at some of the top teams, Miles Robinson, say Keegan Rosenberry, there's a shout. Dagerdan Thorhalson for Orlando. Let's see, Jandre Yedlin, still on the list, FC Cincinnati. Mickey Yamane and Maya Yoshida from the Galaxy, as well as Dario Zaparic from the Timbers. So those are a few names that stick out on that list. Gosh, Defender of the Year, that's going to be difficult. I mean, you might want to lean towards Miles Robinson, but it's hard not to think that one of the Miami guys isn't going to get it. Because, I mean, you're a Shield winner, but Jordi Alba also contributes to the offense so much. And usually in MLS for Defender of the Year, it's the guy who's contributing on the offensive side of things. When Walker Zimmerman won it, I think he had 4 goals and a couple assists that season. So that does kind of tip the scales in favor of the Defender of the Year. Young Player of the Year nominees, this is cool to see because we've got 2 Chicago Fire players on the list, Chris Brady and Brian Gutierrez, obviously both of them making the 22 under 22 list. Brian Gutierrez coming in at 4th on that list, and Chris Brady, I think, was 13th on that list. The only goalkeeper to be on the 22 under 22 list. So to be eligible for Young Player of the Year, you have to be born after January 1st, 2022, and have played at least 500 minutes during the season. So who are some of the big names that pop out here other than our Chicago Fire homegrowns? Esmir Baraktarovich, New England Revolution, Diego Gomez, Miami, Nixon Gomes, TFC, Tavon Gray, New York City. Let's see who else. Ted Kudepietro, DC United, Diego Luna. A lot of people are picking Diego Luna as the Young Player of the Year. A lot of people wanted him on the Olympic squad, and of course when he doesn't get the call-up, he goes out and bangs in a few goals right after that. So those are players to keep a look on. As much as I would love to see Nico Tsakiris, my fellow Greek, down in San Jose win it, I don't know, again, how San Jose gets any nominees this year, but the fact remains he's on the list. Other names that you would know, Jack McGlynn, Juan Mascara as well. All right, and then Newcomer of the Year, I think we talked about that a little bit already, so I have gone through the entire list. Those are your player awards, and thank you for sticking with me and rambling on through all of this. We won't get into all the playoff matchups and talk just yet, but we do have to mention that tomorrow night, the first wildcard game, Tuesday, October 22nd, Montreal is hosting Atlanta, 6:30 p.m. Central, I believe, and that is going to decide who goes on to play Supporter Shield winners, Inter Miami. Following night, Wednesday the 23rd, we've got Vancouver hosting Portland in Portland. And yes, you heard me say that correctly, due to a monster truck rally going on at Vancouver Stadium. They will be the home team, but they will be playing in Portland at Portland's stadium there. So keep a lookout for those 2 games. And then the first round of the playoffs, which, as we know, was updated last year to be a best-of-3 series. Those matches will begin on October 25th with Miami taking on the wild card winner, and then rolling through the Eastern and Western conferences. So that's everything I got for you. I haven't done an hour-long episode in a while. I'm sure my wife is wondering what happened to me, or more appropriately, she's like, yeah, he's just talking soccer again. So he could be back tomorrow, or he could be back in 5 minutes. Who knows? But I want to thank you all for sticking with me for this hour, for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Chicago Fire podcast that I put on. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. It's great to be able to experience this whole season with everyone. I haven't even gotten into my postseason thanks. It's for all the fans that I've got to meet and interact with throughout the season, for the organization for being so awesome and welcoming me and my family, to being able to meet and get to know a number of employees, to seeing Dave Baldwin on the sidewalk around the Waldron deck when I'm walking into the game, and him just really stopping and taking the time to talk to fans and see what they want, and to hand out swag and apparel to fans, just everything. I really enjoyed this Chicago Fire season as a fan, results aside, of course, but I'm happy I renewed my season tickets. I'm looking forward to what they do in the offseason. But first, I'm looking forward to these MLS Cup playoffs, and I hope you are too. And for the offseason, let's say it together, Fire fans. Let's go Fire!